Hi, everyone. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us today. We have a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Tyler. I never imagined I'd be standing outside my own house, locked out like a stranger, while my wife smiled at me from the window and told me she had found someone better. But that's exactly what happened. I'm going to tell you how it all went down. Stay with me, because this one gets wild. I had just returned from a long work trip, exhausted but relieved to finally be back home. All I wanted was to drop my bags, take a hot shower, and collapse into my own bed. But as I stepped up to my front door and reached for my keys, I quickly realized that the locks had been changed. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Had Vanessa changed them while I was gone? Was there an issue with the old locks? I knocked on the door, waiting to hear her familiar footsteps. Instead, silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Then I saw a movement. A shadow passed behind the curtain, and a few seconds later, Vanessa's face appeared in the window. But something was wrong. She wasn't rushing to let me in. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't hesitate. She just looked me straight in the eye and said, "I found someone better." I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The words didn't make sense. What the hell was she talking about? Before I could even process it, I saw a movement inside. A man was in my living room. "Vanessa, open the door," I said, my voice tight. "What is going on?" She lifted a stack of papers and waved them in front of the window. "This house? It's mine now," she said casually. "So you need to leave before I call the police." I blinked, struggling to keep up. My house? I never signed anything over to her. I never agreed to anything like this. "Vanessa, stop playing games. Let me in." But she didn't. She just shook her head, her expression completely unreadable. "You don't live here anymore, Tyler. Just go." I was completely shocked by her words. This wasn't just Vanessa being dramatic. This was real. She had locked me out of my own home, and there was a man inside. I felt anger rising inside me, but I didn't waste time. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. I needed to know my rights before I did something I'd regret. When my lawyer picked up, I explained everything. The locks, the man inside, the paper she waved in my face, and her threat to call the police. I expected him to tell me I had every right to walk into my own home. Instead, he said, "Tyler, listen to me carefully," his tone firm. "If you try to force your way in, she'll call the police." And here's the problem. When it comes to domestic disputes, the police don't care about ownership. They care about keeping the peace. If she claims she feels threatened, even if she's lying, they'll side with her to avoid conflict. You could end up spending the night in jail. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I owned that house. I paid for it. And yet, somehow, the law could still work against me. So what am I supposed to do? I asked. "For now, you need to walk away," he said. "I know it's unfair, but trust me, making a scene will only hurt you in the long run. Go somewhere else for the night. We'll handle this legally." I stood there for a long moment, staring at the front door of what was supposed to be my home. I was being told to walk away. I didn't want to, but I wasn't stupid. I knew my lawyer was right. If I stayed and tried to fight this now, it would only make things worse. With no other choice, I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove off. I didn't even know where I was going at first. Eventually, I pulled into a hotel parking lot and checked in, sitting alone in my hotel room. I felt like my entire marriage had been a lie. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the signs had always been there. I had just refused to see them for what they were. Vanessa had always been obsessed with money from the very beginning. She had expensive tastes, designer bags, luxury vacations, constant shopping. At first, I didn't mind. I wanted to make her happy, and if buying her things did that, then fine. But over time, I started to notice a pattern. It wasn't just about treating herself every now and then. It was constant. She expected me to provide for every little thing she wanted, no matter how unnecessary or ridiculous it was. And if I ever hesitated, even for a second, she made sure I regretted it. Any time I said no, even for a good reason, it turned into a full-blown argument. She would sulk, pick fights, and throw the same threat in my face every single time. If you don't give me what I want, I'll find someone who will. I had always brushed it off, thinking she was just being dramatic, saying empty words in the heat of the moment. But now, sitting here, locked out of my own house, I realized she had meant it all along. She had been telling me exactly who she was, and I had been too blind to take her seriously. Our last fight before my trip should have been my wake-up call. I had told her she needed to stop wasting money on pointless things. She had been spending recklessly, buying things she didn't need, hoarding expensive clothes she never wore, treating online shopping like it was her full-time job. I had reached my limit and finally put my foot down. I told her I wouldn't keep funding her wasteful lifestyle. She had laughed it off at the time, acting like I was overreacting, but she was already planning her way out. She didn't want to stop spending. She just needed someone else to foot the bill. I should have seen this coming. I should have known that one day she'd make good on her threats. But no matter how many warning signs there were, nothing could have prepared me for what she did next. The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room feeling like I had just come out of a bad dream. Except it wasn't a dream. I grabbed my phone and called Vanessa. It rang a few times before going straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. She had declined the call. I let out a slow breath, trying to push down my frustration. I just needed to talk to her, to figure out what was going on. So I sent her a message. Vanessa, we need to talk. Call me back. No response. I sent another, keeping my words as neutral as possible. I don't know what's going on, but this isn't the way to handle it. Let's talk. Again, nothing. After a few minutes, I realized what was happening. This had been planned. Whatever she had done, she had gone through the effort of making sure I had no way to stop it. I sat on the edge of the bed, forcing myself to think clearly. Arguing with her wouldn't work. Begging wouldn't change anything. If she wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. I wouldn't waste any more time trying to reason with her. Instead, I would do what actually mattered. I needed to stay calm, document everything, and get proof. Making my move. After gathering everything I could, I went to police. I walked into the station, sat down with an officer, and explained everything as clearly as I could. I told him how I had come home to find the locks changed, how my wife had refused to let me in, how she had waved around documents claiming the house was now hers, even though I had never signed anything over to her. The officer listened, nodding as I spoke. When I arrived at the house with the officers, I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone was going to set things right. Then Vanessa opened the door. She had come prepared. The moment the officers knocked, she appeared with a cool, almost bored expression, like she had been expecting them. Without missing a beat, she handed them a stack of papers. "I'm the rightful owner of this house," she said, her voice calm and confident. "My husband no longer lives here." I watched as the officer flipped through the documents. This was insane. "This isn't possible," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's my house. I bought it. I never transferred anything to her." One of the officers glanced at me, but remained neutral. "Sir, according to these documents, the property is in her name." I took a step closer, trying to get a look at the papers myself. But they looked legit, and that was all that mattered. The police weren't there to investigate. They weren't there to determine who was right or wrong. They were there to keep the peace. And right now, the only paperwork in front of them said the house belonged to Vanessa. Then they asked me to leave. I swallowed the burning frustration in my chest and took a step back. When I finally met with my lawyer that day, I explained everything that had happened. And that's when I realized this fight was just beginning, and why lawyer didn't seem surprised. Apparently, cases like this weren't unheard of. If she has paperwork proving ownership, she either tricked you into signing something or forged your signature, he said. The second option seemed more likely. There was no way I had ever signed over my house to her. Without wasting time, we headed straight to the police station to file an official report. I sat in a cramped office as an officer typed up my statement, detailing how my wife had fraudulently transferred ownership and locked me out. We provided everything we could, my original mortgage documents, proof of payments, and anything else that showed I was a rightful owner. My lawyer made it clear that we were filing a criminal complaint, not just a civil one. This wasn't just a dispute. It was forgery, fraud, a crime. Before leaving, we made sure to get a case number, something solid to follow up on. But filing a police report was only step one. Stuck in limbo. Next, my lawyer moved fast. He filed a court motion demanding immediate access to my home. He also drafted a separate lawsuit to completely nullify the fraudulent deed, making it clear that Vanessa had no legal right to claim my property. It was all happening quickly, but there was one problem: timing. The courts were running slower than usual because of the holiday season, and the judge couldn't issue an emergency injunction right away. That meant I couldn't legally re-enter my own house until the case was processed. With no other choice, I checked back into my hotel, stuck in limbo while my lawyer fought to push things forward. The frustration was eating me alive. The days that followed were some of the most infuriating of my life. Not only had I been locked out of my own house, but Vanessa also refused to let me retrieve any of my belongings at MY Clothes. My work documents, my personal items. Everything I owned was still inside, and she acted like I had no right to any of it. Every time I called or texted to ask my things, she either ignored me or sent back short, dismissive responses. The anger burned inside me, but I knew I had to stay calm. As much as I wanted to force my way in and take what was mine, I understood how easily she could twist the situation. If I showed up demanding my things, she could play the victim, call the police, and suddenly I'd be the one in trouble. I refused to let her trap me like that. Instead, I documented everything: every ignored call, every unanswered text, every time she flat out refused to cooperate. My lawyer told me to be patient, to trust the legal process. That was easier said than done. The first day in court, the tension in the courtroom was thick. The judge wasted no time. Before anything else, he ruled that I had the right to collect my personal belongings from the house. It was a small win, but it was something. That same afternoon, I returned home for the first time since she had shut me out. Vanessa barely spoke to me while I gathered my things. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching me like I was some intruder. But I wasn't just there for my clothes and essentials. I needed proof. I searched through my documents until I found what I was looking for: the legitimate, most recent copies of the title deed and property documents. These were my lifeline in court, my proof that what Vanessa had done was illegal. I also gathered bank records showing the transaction history of the house payments, further proving that I had never transferred ownership to her. I tucked everything away carefully. The next time we were in court, Vanessa confidently presented her so-called proof of ownership, but my lawyer was ready. He requested a forensic examination of the signatures on her documents. The court brought in an expert, someone who specialized in detecting forgery. I watched closely as they analyzed the papers. The expert compared the signatures, examining every curve, every stroke, every minor inconsistency. Then came the moment of truth. The expert looked up and addressed the judge directly. The documents are fake. The signature was forged. Vanessa's face paled. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with tension moments ago, fell silent. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something shift in my favor. The truth was out. Instead of taking responsibility, she did what cowards do. She shifted the blame. She pointed at her lover and claimed the whole thing was his idea. He's the one who convinced me to do it. I didn't even want to. He handled the papers, not me, she insisted. But it was too late. Throwing him under the bus wasn't going to save her. If anything, it made her look even worse. Her last-minute attempt to escape consequences backfired completely. My legal team wasted no time. We went after both of them with full force. The charges were severe: criminal forgery, which carried serious legal consequences, and financial damages for wrongful eviction. She had stolen my home, locked me out, and forced me to spend money on hotels and legal fees. Now, it was time for her to pay for what she had done. When the verdict was finally read, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Vanessa and her accomplice were both found guilty. The judge didn't go easy on them either. Prison time. They were sentenced, locked up, and officially labeled criminals. But that wasn't all. Vanessa was ordered to pay heavy fines on top of her prison sentence. Even after serving her time, she would still be in debt, still dealing with the consequences of her actions. As for me, I finally regained full control of my home. But my fight wasn't over yet. There was one last thing left to do. When Vanessa gets out of prison, I will be filing for divorce. This wasn't just about cutting ties. It was about making sure she never had a way to come back into my life again. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Looking back on everything, I can't help but wonder, how did I not see this coming? Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I ignored the signs because I believe in my marriage, because I trusted my wife. But if there's one thing I've learned from this nightmare, it's that trust without verification is a dangerous thing. Love can blind you. It can make you overlook things that should have been clear as day. I trusted Vanessa, but I never thought to protect myself in case that trust was misplaced. That was my mistake. And the red flags? They were always there. Every time she hinted at finding someone better, I brushed it off as empty talk. I figured she was just venting, saying things in the heat of the moment. I never once considered that she might actually mean it. Now, looking back, I have no idea she had been seeing someone else this whole time. Was this planned? How long had she been waiting for the right moment to pull something like this? I'll probably never know. One thing is for sure, I'll never make this mistake again. If you own something, protect it. If it's in your name, make sure no one can take it from you with a forged signature or some legal loophole. Keep records. Keep proof. And don't assume that just because you're married, the person beside you wouldn't stab you in the back if given the chance. But I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have handled things differently? Let me know in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this story with them. You never know who might be ignoring the same red flags I did.